Coming up, an update on Cam Thomas's future with the Nets after his season-ending injury. Before I'm joined by Kerry Kittles to break down his career and the Nets' title runs in the early 2000s. I'll have all that and more after this. What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. And on today's episode, we had a very special guest, former Nets great Kerry Kittles of the early 2000s, part of their title runs in 2002 and 2003. He joined me. We just had a great talk about his early career, the draft, his coming into the league all the way into the Jason Kidd years, the title runs, and also just some talk about the modern NBA and how former players feel about it. I think it was really interesting. I think you guys will really enjoy that. But before that, if you guys do not already, go to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater NBA, subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button. It takes a second. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about, Cam Thomas's situation or what I'm about to get into with Kerry Kittles. It really helps to, drive engagement on these videos, so I really appreciate that. But before the Kerry interview, I want to touch quick on a Cam Thomas update, also where the Nets stand in the draft lottery standings. They just picked up a win over the Atlanta Hawks last night at Barclays Center. They now sit a half game ahead of the Philadelphia 76ers for fifth place in the draft lottery standings. They're a full game ahead of the Toronto Raptors. So a little bit of a missed opportunity last night to gain some more ground. But the big news in the past few days has been Cam Thomas suffering another hamstring injury to that left leg during Thursday's loss to the Chicago Bulls. That's his third of the season, and it's going to end his season. The Nets have effectively ruled him out for the remainder of the year, which ends an injury-riddled campaign for Cam. He appeared in 25 games this year, averaged 24 points, 3.8 assists, 44, 35, 88 shooting splits, but obviously in a contract season in the final year of his rookie deal. So not ideal, obviously, to only play in 25 games. And with him now being done for the season, attention and eyes are really going to shift to his restricted free agency this summer. He's going to be the biggest domino to fall in terms of the players on the current Nets roster. And, I'm going to have a future episode, I think probably later this week, with a cap expert talking about what Cam's contract can look like and some things along those lines. But we spoke to him last night before the Hawks game, and what he had to say was pretty interesting. He said he definitely wants to be back with the Nets, and he said that he'd like to make that happen. He's going to let his agent sort it out. I also asked him if he feels like, since coming into a featured role these last two seasons, if he's done enough to warrant being a core piece with the Nets moving forward. And he gave a very Cam Thomas response. He said, of course, with a smile. And he also said that he feels like when he's got minutes, substantial minutes with the Nets, that he's been one of the best guards in the NBA, and that the sky's the limit for him if he's given an opportunity and given that role. And the Nets have given it to him this last, season and a half. They've really leaned into him, but obviously that's come with a ship to a rebuild, and there weren't many other choices there. So we'll see with this restricted free agency how the Nets value him. Whether it could be a short-term deal, a 1, 2, 3 year deal, there's still a lot to be sorted out there. I think what is evident is that the Nets are going to have a lot of leverage in negotiations with Cam because they are the only team in the NBA with significant cap space. They pretty much hoarded all of the cap space. The Detroit Pistons are the only other team with significant space, or who could open up significant space. They can get to around $25 million, but I think it's pretty safe to say that with Cade Cunningham in place as their lead ball handler, and they have several free agents to try to re-sign, like Malik Beasley, who's had a great year, Tobias Harris. So I don't think that they would be pursuing Cam Thomas. Other teams could maybe try to open up cap space, but at this juncture, the Nets have all the cap space. So, a lot of teams are really going to be working with the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is $14 million. So the ball's in the Nets' court with free agency, with Cam Thomas negotiations, and they have the right, obviously, as a restricted free agent as Cam is, to match any offer that's made to him. But, I think the expectation right now should be that Cam is back. I think the length of the contract and what number, those are going to be the things to watch. And I'm going to have a at-length discussion hopefully later this week with a cap expert, breaking all that down and maybe giving some projections and trying to, kind of see from both sides what they might be looking for. So that'll be really great. But that's all I have on the Nets' current situation. I'm going to take a stroll down memory lane with Kerry Kittles Hope you guys really enjoyed the talk. A lot of insight into what those Nets title runs were like and also how former players are viewing the current NBA. So I think it was really interesting. We'll get to that after a quick break.
It's Kidd. And Kittles for three. Kerry Kittles is a flamethrower. And he has sparked New Jersey to their biggest lead tonight.
Kerry Kittles is huge for this team. He's coming up big to start the second half.
We have a very special guest here today on Believe in Nets. Kerry Kittles, one of the former Nets greats, joins the pod. Kerry, how are you, man? I appreciate you for taking the time.
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So what we were going to do today is pretty much just take a look at Kerry's career, go through a lot of, probably what are some of the most endearing memories of Nets fans back in the time in New Jersey, and kind of wanted to take a chronological look at it. And obviously, Kerry, you had an outstanding college career at Villanova, program's all-time leading scorer. And before we get into the Nets stuff, any reaction, obviously, yesterday to the, firing of Kyle Neptune and maybe, hopes and impressions of where the program's going to go moving forward?
Yeah, it was sad to see Kyle go. I think, he's been a part of the Villanova family for quite some time as an assistant and a short stint as a head coach. But, the business now, it's really a lot of turnover across college basketball. So we wish him well in his next endeavors. But, that seat is going to be a hot seat to fill. So we'll see which way the school decides to go with that.
Did you ever have any hopes of getting involved there in a coaching capacity or any other capacity?
Nah.
No?
I'm a North Jersey guy.
Okay, gotcha. I like that. So am I. And last thing on Villanova, also, there's a player there, Eric Dixon, who is threatening to I'm not sure if Villanova is going to be in a postseason tournament, but I think he's only a few points shy of your record. So I'm not sure if you've gotten to see him play, but what has it been like if you have gotten to see him, of kind of seeing him chase your record?
Yeah, I've seen him play quite a bit. Really strong physical player. Has really developed a really good perimeter game as well to go along with his physicality around the basket. And he's been there for 5 years. Most of us only have 4 years, but the record gets broken, it gets broken, right? So it's all good.
All right, so you getting into your Nets career, you come in alongside John Calipari, obviously, and going into that draft in '96. Did you have a strong indication, going in there, that the Nets were going to take you?
I think like a few days leading up to the draft, well, actually maybe no, a week or so before the draft, they brought me back in for a second workout, and my agent told me that there's a strong possibility that they're going to draft me around 8. So yeah, I kind of knew that was a possibility, and once the guys started going, I kind of knew that was going to happen. So yeah, it's interesting to be a college player drafted with a new coach who really doesn't know the NBA at all, who's coming out of college just like I did. And so it was cool. We had a really good relationship. We had a lot of spent a lot of one-on-one time together, just talking about the game and my role and how he saw me and how he really wanted to watch and develop me. So it was learning on the fly, both of us.
And obviously you were one of several great players from that '96 draft class, which a lot of people presume is one of the best of all time. And it gets to that 8th pick, and obviously you and Kobe Bryant were both sitting there. What was the impression? Obviously, I think people were a little more hesitant to take high school kids back then. And what was the feeling amongst you and the other draftees, watching him fall? Were people kind of surprised that he was falling that far at that point, or was it kind of, going as people expected?
I think it was going as expected. I mean, it was, there were definitely some guys. Kevin Garnett the year before came out of high school, but it wasn't really common for high school kids. I mean, he was the first guard, wing to come out of high school. I want to say almost everyone else was forwards or centers. So, but yeah, no, he was definitely talked about as a young up and coming player, talented player. I played against him with John Lucas and some workouts in Philly, and I saw how good he was going to be back then. It was no doubt about it. That kid was going to be special. So yeah, that draft class was an amazing class. I mean, obviously with Allen Iverson and Ray Allen and Steve Nash and others, Peja and Jermaine O'Neal. So it was a heck of a class to be a part of, and I still think it's the deepest draft class ever.
And obviously, it's something that comes up from time to time. You had a great career with the Nets, and obviously Kobe goes on to do what he does, and the Nets passing on him and taking you. It gets brought up from time to time. Is that ever something that, gets brought up to you, or something that bothers you, having that, when you had such a good career, having that kind of linger over it?
There was 12 other teams that passed over Kobe. So why they mention the Nets? Because I guess the Nets was the only team that really strongly considered it. Okay, great. But I mean, he's one of the best to ever play the game. So I guess, what can you say? My hat's off to him.
And getting into your rookie season, as I said, you come in alongside great college player, alongside a great college coach in Calipari. Just what was the vibe and the feeling surrounding the team and just the organization, the vibe of basketball in New Jersey going into that rookie season?
To be honest with you, it was really low energy. It was low energy. We knew that we had our work cut out for us to rebuild that organization. And we quickly knew that right away. We had so many veterans that were older veterans. We didn't really have any marquee players. We had Kendall Gill, we had Jason Williams. They were good. They were very good veterans, but we didn't have anyone to dominate games. And back then, you played through your stars. Even in today's game, they still play through their stars. But more so in the mid '90s, you had to have guys who were dominant. In particular, dominant big men. And
yep.
We didn't have that. So it was a rebuilding season for us. We had Sean Bradley, who was our 7'5" center. And then obviously the most talked about thing was the trade that happened mid-season, where it was a 9-player trade, and we wound up getting some really good talented players with Sam Cassell and Jimmy Jackson and Chris Gatlin from Dallas. And then from there, we were able to build at least a playoff contending team the following season.
Yeah, and on that note, you guys also obviously get Keith Van Horn that following season. You guys are the top 2 scorers. Jason Williams makes an all-star team. You improved by 17 games. And, what was your initial impression of Keith Van Horn when he came in and the pairing that you two had going, and kind of the turnaround that you saw during that second season?
Well, yeah, I think Keith was a little bit ahead of his time. I mean, he was a 6'10" forward who really played on the perimeter as well. He could post up, but he could also shoot threes and stretch the floor. So that gave us a huge advantage to have someone who, with that skill set. And, was very athletic for a big, and could drive around a lot of the bigs in the league. I mean, he was really going around guys. So, and then Sam Cassell was just this savvy veteran who had been there, won 2 championships his first 2 years with the Rockets. And obviously, Kendall Gill was still really, really good, a really good wing. So we had a good roster, and we proved it. We were able to make the playoffs and face the the Bulls in the first round. But it was a good stepping stone for us, especially after the year before.
And you are, you guys struggle your rookie season. As you said, it's a low energy team. You guys know you have your work cut out for you. You make this turnaround with some roster moves in the second year, and then you play the Bulls in the first round, who are obviously at the end of a dynasty, and you draw the assignment on Michael Jordan. Just what was that like as a second-year player going against that team and having that matchup and going against the greatest to ever do it?
It's really a dream come true to be on the court playing against Michael Jordan. For anybody that played in the mid-'90s around my era, those matchups, those games, especially, it was Michael Jordan, right? It was like he's the biggest guy in all of sports. He's a global icon. He's, multi-championships and MVPs, and you're out there and you're playing against him, but you're also playing against the Bulls, and it's more than just Michael. So it's really overwhelming. It really is to be on the court. You got Scotty on one side, you got Dennis Rodman down there banging in the middle, and then you look over to the sideline and you have this genius in Phil Jackson that's there calling the shots. So anybody will tell you when they played against that Bulls team, especially in the postseason, they can remember almost every game, most of the moments that took place. And I just remember playing them in that old stadium in Chicago. It was just the sound was just deafening.
And you guys gave them a tough game in that game one. You took them to overtime. Was there any moment in that game where you guys kind of started like, hey, like we can hang with these guys, we can compete?
Yeah, I mean, we thought we could compete with them, and we definitely challenged them in that first game. But you're talking about a veteran, experienced team, and they ran that triangle offense to a T, and their adjustments were just once they made adjustments, they had us figured out. We didn't really have too many counter punches, but we initially gave them some good competition early on, but they figured us out, and then they rolled us in game 2 and in game 3 in New Jersey.
And then after that, you guys make a big time move to acquire Stephon Marbury, and you kind of transition into a new iteration of the team. And he comes in and you guys struggle. And there was obviously some turmoil there. He, famously wrote "All Alone" on his sneakers before one of those games. And just what was it like in that locker room when you have a player like that who's supposed to be your top guy, do something like that, and it got the attention that it did?
Yeah, that one move that he did was unfortunate move, and I'm sure Steph will probably take it back if he had a chance to. But he was frustrated. I mean, Stephon Marbury was one of the most competitive players I ever played with, and he came from Minnesota with Garnett, and he had a different standard that he held for himself and for his teammates, and having a losing team, and I was injured a lot, and the roster just wasn't quite as strong, and he wanted to win, and he was doing so well individually, and made the All-Star team that year. Had a great show out in the All-Star game, one-on-one against Kobe, pretty much, and going shot for shot. So that was unfortunate. But listen, I think that was just part of the Nets transformation over the years. Is just trying to figure out the organization and where we wanted to go, who we really wanted to build around, who was going to be the core pieces, and then we finally wound up acquiring Jason Kidd, which was the move that we all really needed to bring us all together.
Yeah, and you get Kidd before that 2001-2002 season. You also draft Richard Jefferson. You're coming back from a knee injury. You missed the whole previous season. Yeah. When the Nets made that trade for Kidd, just what was the vibe and expectation around the team, knowing that he was going to come in and be the lead ball handler?
I mean, he was the number one player in the NBA that if you ask anybody who they would want to play with, they wanted to play with Jason Kidd, because he was a pass-first point guard, and he played with pace, and he really didn't want to score necessarily. He did if he had to, but he just wanted everybody else to score, and he loved it. So, I mean, when the trade happened, we went from having a point guard who was averaging over 20 points a game. Marbury was probably averaging 21 points a game, maybe 22. That was a lot back then. Today's game is like whatever. But back then, to have a point guard who had the ball in their hands a lot, to average over 20 points, and to have a point guard who just really wanted to pass, it was a dream come true for all of us. And so it was really exciting. And I'll never forget that year, just having our training camp, the first practice we had, and just to see us on the court together and looking around, like, once the practice was over, we were like, oh my God, like we're gonna be pretty good. We're gonna be pretty good. Like, this is gonna be fun. This is gonna be really fun.
Yeah. How would you describe just what Kidd? I mean, you guys obviously you improved by 26 wins and you make it to the finals. How would you describe, what Kidd brought on the court? Obviously, you talk about his selflessness, all the things that he did outside of scoring, but also just in terms of leadership, in terms of the vibe in the locker room, what he did to spark what many would consider, one of the greatest turnarounds, single season turnarounds in NBA history.
Yeah, all I could say is that you just don't know how hard the game was prior to playing with him. And then you start to play with him in the game, and you're like, this is so easy. Like, I can't believe how easy the game is now. And it wasn't just me, it was everybody. We were all like, how do we get these open shots? Like wide open dunks, layups, like it just happens. You watch the film and you watch the tape, and like we were watching as a team, and we just couldn't believe how easy he made the game for all of us. So, and it was fun because Jason Kidd, honestly, like he wanted to play both sides of the ball. Like he really took pride in playing defense. He just didn't go down the court and just take the whole possession off. Like, he competed. So it was fun. And then once the wins started to happen and we were starting to beat quality teams, and we realized we were good, other teams realized we were a good team, then it was a matter of us just sustaining it throughout the season. Can we sustain this and not just be some, fluke at the beginning of the season? So
yeah, and you talk about him making the game easy for you, obviously. Like, what was that process like of being a guy who's, not a lead ball handler? You obviously have Marbury in that role, and then you come in with Kidd, and it's obviously a completely different type of player. Just what was the process like of transitioning from how you played with Marbury to Kidd, and how long did it kind of take to understand where those spots were, to get those easy shots and some of the things that he was able to do with the basketball that you probably just hadn't seen up to that point?
Yeah, I think we moved away from a lot of ball screens. Stephon Marbury was ball screen dominant. And we know for us, it was just standing and watching whatever he decided to do, decisions he made. Whereas we moved to a different offense. We had this Princeton-style offense where, yeah, of course, Jason Kidd was the primary ball handler, but the offense, really, the ball moved a lot. And we swung the ball from one side to the other. There was a lot of, back doors and cuts. And we played off the ball a lot more, so that made the game a lot easier. And it was fun. It was like, okay, we didn't know who was going to score and how it was going to happen. The offense dictated it. It wasn't the triangle offense that the Bulls ran. It was a different variation of it, and that was fun to see how it all happened. But no question about it. When Jason Kidd got the ball, he made plays happen for all of us. But yeah, it was an exciting time, man. It was fun because most teams couldn't figure out how to guard us because the offense was so unique in how it was designed and how we ran it with the players we had with all of the quickness from the perimeter with myself and Jason Kidd, Kenyon Martin, obviously, and Richard Jefferson. And
then you talk about that Princeton-style offense in the half court, but I think anybody who watched those teams knew that you guys got out and ran on the fast break.
If you missed a shot and it was a long rebound, good luck trying to stop us.
Bibby, a miss. Jason Kidd with 10 of those 23 assists. Make it 11.
Just anticipating once again. We see Kidd. He makes it look so easy.
Yeah. And
it was fast.
Anybody who watched you play knows that, you could fly on the court, and you guys had other guys like RJ and Kenyon Martin and guys who could run. So what was it like running that fast break with all those guys? Because you had Kidd, this guy who can make any pass on the court, it seems like, and you have other guys who can run and are extremely athletic. So it led to, a lot of highlight plays and a lot of successful basketball, obviously.
Yeah, I never played with anybody who could beat me down the court until that year. I was a fast open court player, but Kenyon Martin, RJ was fast. Don't get me wrong. Richard was fast. And Jason Kidd pushing the ball was the fastest in the NBA. But Kenyon Martin, from baseline to baseline, he was the fastest guy on the team by far. It wasn't even close. He was just that athletic. Man, that was fun. That was fun. And so sometimes I just would run to the three-point line and watch Richard and Kenyon run to the basket. You had to cover those two because Jason was throwing lobs one way or another. And then once you covered the rim, you had to find Kerry the three-point line.
Every possession. Collins vacuums it in. Here comes Kidd with options on both sides, including Kittles for three.
So it was a good time, man. That was fun basketball.
Was it strange or unusual to see a guy who's Kenyon's size be that fast and that athletic and do the things that he was able to do just running the floor?
Yeah, man, he was incredible. I was amazed, like jumping off the floor, how quick and how high. And then, he was one of the few guys in the entire NBA who can guard 1 through 5 on most nights besides Shaquille O'Neal. But if he switched on a point guard, you weren't gonna just have it easy against him. Like, you couldn't just drive past him. His lateral quickness was, I've never seen anybody move that way laterally.
They're trying to fight his way open. Martin draped all over him. Now Carter works. 5 seconds. Defending is Martin. Carter down the lane, and a whistle stops play. A jump ball called.
I mean, obviously vertically he was really gifted, but laterally he was maybe even better. And so to be able to have to switch 1 through 4 and do what he did and take guys out of the play, I mean, he was an incredible defensive player. I thought he should have been up for Defensive Player of the Year. But wow, what a competitor. And his motor, he was high energy every single day, every night. And he just took power forwards out the game on most nights.
And you said that first training camp practice with Kidd, you guys are out there, you say, man, like we're going to be pretty good. And then it's obviously apparent early on that you guys are a good team. But was there at one point in the season where you guys knew like, okay, we can make a serious run at this title and be one of, the premier teams in the league?
Yeah, I don't know if it was one point in the season, but I think over time, right, you go out west in the mid-season and you win 3 out of 4 road games against quality playoff teams in the West, and you're leading your division in the East. I think at a certain point you realize, okay, well the ball's in our hands now. Like we could do whatever we want with our season. So let's just continue this run, stay healthy, and then make a push in the postseason and just win games. We're going to have home court advantage, and we were winning a lot of games at home. So I think teams really knew that we were a threat, and we knew that within ourselves. And so, man, it was just fun. That was the best team I ever played on because we just played so unselfish. Everybody, no one looked at the box scores. We didn't care who scored. We didn't care who did what. We just wanted to win games.
And you talk about winning a lot of games at home. And you also touched on earlier that it was a low energy atmosphere surrounding the team that you came in. And then Kidd comes in, you guys have all, yourself and all these other acquisitions that spark, just in, like I said, one of the greatest turnarounds, single season turnarounds in NBA history. During that playoff run and throughout that season, just what was the atmosphere like at the Meadowlands? Because it was just really Showtime basketball, obviously. And it was a turnaround that a lot of people, while they thought you might have been better, maybe people didn't anticipate that you guys could make a run to the finals like you did. So just what were those home games like?
Yeah, it went from being a really, really dead Continental Airlines arena to looking across the bench to those courtside seats and seeing, celebrities. You're seeing The Sopranos, or you're seeing Jay-Z courtside. you're seeing a lot of faces that really were never coming to that building to watch us play. So I don't know if there were sellout crowds, but the energy in the building was definitely different than it was in prior years. And then you start seeing fan engagement pick up, really, really pick up where, there's Nets shirts and the fans are waving towels. Every time we scored, it was a lot of, we were feeding off the crowd. We were getting energy from the crowd, which had never happened before. So that was fun. That was fun to be able to establish a competitive franchise where you knew you were going to win on most nights. We knew we were going to win on most nights. If we played our game, most teams just couldn't compete with us, especially at home. So that was fun to be a part of that, right? To build that, going from a franchise that was losing in most games, the building was dead. You're getting in your car driving home going, what is this? Like, it's the NBA, obviously, but wow, like we can't even compete with these teams. So now having a team where you're being on TNT, you're putting those games on, they're highlighting the team, they're being talked about in sports magazines, and obviously we're now taking over New York sports where the Knicks are like, wow, what's going on in New Jersey? So that was fun to be a part of that.
Was that something that you guys took pride in? Because obviously, like the Knicks Nets, it's always been, now so it's like the little brother, big brother. But that was the time. And I know RJ likes to clown on the Knicks sometimes for what you guys were able to do during the time there. But was it something you took pride in of like?
We used to spank the Knicks. We used to spank them. I mean, we used to go. We couldn't wait to go in those 2 seasons, those final seasons when we played the Knicks, man. They had nothing for us. They didn't. And that was fun because they had a lot more press coverage than us. They're the storied franchise, the New York Knicks, the Madison Square Garden. And then you have your next door neighbor just coming in there, just running shop on you and just rolling through. We used to beat them all the time. So that was fun. RJ, I love to hear him talk about those times and share that with the audience about how the Nets used to dominate the Knicks. That was fun.
And now getting into obviously the end of that 2001, 2002 season, you guys just kind of ran into a buzzsaw, obviously, with Shaq and Kobe on that Lakers team. And, obviously Kobe's ascending. He's one of the best players in the league. And then you have Shaq, a player who you really most teams just don't have a matchup for. And, it seems like you guys didn't, and that's to no fault of anybody on your team. He was just that physically dominant. So what was it like going in, trying to prepare for that series when you have, that kind of mismatch with him in the middle?
For me personally, it was like flashbacks. It was literally like playing against Michael Jordan, and playing against Kobe, and playing against Mike. It wasn't that much of a difference. Obviously, Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan, right? I think if you're going to compare the two, those Bulls teams centered around Michael and the Lakers centered around Shaq and Kobe. Kobe was so tenacious. He wanted to score every possession. He didn't really want to run that triangle offense, and he didn't want to throw the ball necessarily into Shaq. If Shaq wasn't as dominant as he was, he wouldn't have got the ball like that. And so Kobe was, you said ascending star. I mean, trust me, Kobe Bryant was the best perimeter player. He was the second best player in the NBA at that time behind Shaq. You might want to mention Duncan in that, but I'm telling you, Kobe was just that good. So to play against that team in the finals, and once again, I'm looking over the sideline. I'm seeing Phil Jackson. They're running the triangle offense. Kobe's catching the ball, and he's just unguardable. And then you look around, and he throw the ball into Shaq. And my kids made me watch some of that. Just last week, for whatever reason, my kids put that game on, and it was like, Dad, let's watch you against Kobe in the finals. And I was like watching Shaq and Kobe, and it just brought back like he was just a monster in the middle. I mean, you couldn't foul him. He was still, he was just that big. So, but it was fun for us, to get to the finals. No one, thought that the Nets would make the finals. And so we were out there playing in LA and seeing the media coverage and just being out on that stage, the final two teams competing for a championship. But they were just too dominant.
And then you guys make the run back next season, and you just mentioned Tim Duncan as the other player who would be in that group. And then you run into the Spurs, but it's a much more competitive series. Obviously, it's tied 2-2. You go down 3-2. You end up losing in game 6, but I think you guys were up by like 9 or 10 points in the second half of that game. So, was that a much more like, we've been here, we're battle tested. Now you get to the next year, it's not as dominant a team while still an unbelievable team. And you seemed like you guys really had a shot. So what was that series like going through?
Yeah, I think the nerves were definitely settled. We knew what to expect of being in that moment, and we felt like we had a chance to win it. And it was I think it was Game 5 was a game that we kind of felt like slipped away from us in San Antonio. But yeah, when you playing against those guys, the guys who've been there before, the championship tested teams. And you're playing against a Tim Duncan type player who's just, one of a kind. I think the best power forward to ever play. It was a difficult thing for us to lose that series, 4-2. But we gave it all we had.
And then the following season, you guys lose to the Pistons in 7 games, who were the eventual Eastern Conference champions. And you gave them obviously a really difficult series, but that was kind of where things started to tail off. But did you guys feel like you had more left after that? Or was it kind of a feeling of, this is trending in one direction and, it's going to be a little bit different going on here?
Yeah, the third year was a different season for us. I felt like, once again, I think one of our competitive advantages was the offense that we had run in 2001, 2002. And I think now we're in the third year, so teams are really scouting us and figuring out our sets and our counters. So it was a little bit more difficult for us to score. And the Pistons were really a cohesive unit from 1 through 5. They were really well constructed. They had Lindsey Hunter off the bench. They had other quality guys who just really bought into their style of play, and they posed a real challenge to us. And that's why they won the championship that year. They beat the Lakers. So yeah, we felt like things were changing within our team. It just wasn't quite as easy as it was before, and so we were really fighting the game a little bit more than we have fought it the past couple of seasons.
And then you get traded to the Clippers, and obviously you have your issues with your knee. What was it? Because you had issues with your knee throughout your career. Just what was it like kind of battling through that and, being able to come back and still play at the level physically and athletically that you did, while you were with the Nets coming off that season that you missed? Just, I think it might have even been surprising to some people with you battling a knee injury, how you were still able to move on the court and some of the things that you were able to do physically.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, right, for professional athletes. Is how do you get yourself back from really a major surgeries and injuries, lingering injuries. The wear and tear of the NBA and sports. And back then, it was not like now where we used to practice a lot. So you were competing 6 days a week, ankles taped, live practices. And so the injuries definitely played a role in my career. It shortened my career for sure. And my last year with the Clippers was a challenging year for me physically, just trying to get on the court at all. It was just not happening. So yeah, that's kind of how it ended.
Is it difficult to accept when you play at such a high level for championship level teams, and then your career gets cut short? I think you were 30 years old. Was that difficult to accept at the moment?
Yeah, it's definitely hard to challenge, mentally to prepare yourself for that. You don't expect that the injury is going to be, to end the career that short. So it was definitely a mental challenge for me to deal with.
Now, just getting into some modern NBA stuff, because it's funny. Like I'm 25 years old, and I've gone back. It's a little before my time watching the championship runs, but I've loved to go back and rewatch the full games, as your kids apparently made you do with that Lakers series. And it's just the style of play is just could not be more different from how the game is played today. Like you said, like a lot of it was played inside out. It was played through a dominant big man. You still had great perimeter players and guys who could shoot like you. But I looked it up before this, and that 2002-2003 season, you guys attempted 12.7 threes per game. The Celtics are attempting 12 threes per quarter this season. And the NBA average is like 38 per game. So as a former player, what is it like, just when you put on the NBA these last few years? Does it feel like you're watching an entirely different game? And how does that kind of, resonate and sit with you mentally?
I think it was before COVID, the year right before COVID. So 2018, 2019 season, something like that. I want to say around that time I went to a Nets game and I sat courtside, and I never really sat courtside. I would just sit wherever they give me seats. And I sat courtside and I watched the game up close. And I was like, what am I watching? I was like, this is crazy. It was the Memphis Grizzlies, Jaren Jackson Jr.'s rookie year. I don't know what year that was. And I couldn't believe how fast the game was. And my rookie year, going back to my rookie year, 1996, I'll never forget, we were in training camp, and Kendall Gill was a veteran on the team. He was we played the same position, and he was like a 7-year veteran. And he told me, he said, his exact words were, you go hard on offense and you rest on defense. And I was like, rest on defense? And I didn't know what he meant. And so if you go back and you watch the 90s, you saw a lot of isolation. There was a post-up player primarily on every team. They would throw the ball into the post. If you weren't guarding that guy, you literally had the whole possession off. You would just stand in one spot and watch the one-on-one action. Or if it's a perimeter player, they would ISO you on the wing, and you had to guard your guy on the wing. For me, I had to guard Steve Smith. I had to guard Mitch Richmond. Obviously, you guard Michael. I had to chase Reggie off screens. Those possessions, you had to work as a defender. And my point is, when you watch today's game, there's so much running on defense. You have to cover that side of the court. Once you cross half court, that's the space now, because these guys have extended the game beyond the paint. And so there's so much more running that's required that players have to adjust to. And the pace of play is incredible. It really is. And you mentioned the shooting, the number of threes. This is all they practice. They just practice threes. They don't practice mid-range anymore. Very few players practice mid-range. When you watch it, DeMar DeRozan is a great player, and obviously SGA is a great player. And you will see Jason Tatum and others pull up occasionally, but it's a three-point shooting league. I would have loved to play in today's modern game. So, of course, most former players you talk to struggle with the modern game because it's so different than how it was in the 90s, early 2000s. But it is what it is now, and we sort of have to kind of force ourselves to adjust to it and to try to grow with this modern game and appreciate it. But the scoring is incredible. Look at it. I did it. It's like, how many teams are scoring over 115, 120 points and still losing the game? And still losing? That was a guaranteed W back when I played. You scored 115 points. Even in my teams that we played so fast, we didn't take as many threes, but we played so fast, we didn't score 120 points. We did occasionally, but wow, it's fast, man. It is really fast.
I mean, you go back and look at those games from a lot of the playoff runs, the finals runs that you guys had, and there's a lot of games in the low 80s, 70s. There's even a couple games in the high 60s then. But it's funny that you said, I would have loved to play nowadays because, I've been covering the Nets for a few years now. And when you have star players like they did when I first started covering the team, and just in general now, all teams are looking for athletic players with length who can guard and shoot a ton of threes. The 3-and-D model. Do you ever feel like your career would have been different if you were playing in this era of basketball with the physical attributes and the shooting and just the skill set that you had, and how it would kind of mesh with today's game?
Yeah, I do think about that from time to time, but I think every former player, once the game starts to change, if you ask guys in the 80s who played when there was hand checking, and would they have loved to play in the 90s once they got rid of hand checking, Derek Harper and all those guys that played could you imagine the guys that played for the Pistons and Dennis Rodman and how strong those players were to like not be able to use their hands anymore, or those scores. So I think that's a natural transition to how the game of basketball has changed and the evolution of our sport is what makes basketball so unique. You look at other sports, you look primarily say, well, football, right? There's a lot more passing in football, but for the most part, it looks the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's just this debate that goes on now. Obviously, there's some former players who maybe don't like the way the game is played. Now, there's just a lot of the public. Early on this season, there was a lot of debate about the way the game is played in threes and is it hurting the product overall. But there's also this conversation of people trying to compare how it's played now and the players now to the players who played in the 80s and into the 90s and early 2000s, and the comparisons. And it seems like some people somewhat discredit the level of talent that was in the league in those those time periods, late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Does that bother you and former players when people kind of try to compare the guys now and refer to the star power that's in the league now, and it seems like they're almost putting down what the prior players in the former eras were like?
Yeah, I think those debates are normal to have. Can these modern players play in a more physical era of the 80s and 90s? Can guys from my era in the mid 90s and the early 2000s play in this modern game where they shoot a lot of threes? I think players will be able to play at any era. I think guys in my era, you look at how the lane was. You put on a game from the 1990s, and you look in the paint, and you see if you got past somebody, there was always someone waiting for you at the rim. It wasn't easy to get to the basket, and once you got there, you had to deal with big guys who were either going to block your shot or foul you. You weren't just driving there and just shoot a layup or just throw the ball out and swing it out to the 3-point line. There was big bodies waiting for you, and the physicality was something that you really had to adjust to. But I tend to just appreciate basketball in general, and I do my best to adjust to this modern game and appreciate how skilled these guys are because they are skilled players. My only gripe with today's game is that there are so many good players that just don't play. They sit them out. Whether it's load management. Or whether just guys just physically can't play because it's too fast. I mean, look at the stars now that are out that just can't play. Joel Embiid has been dealing with injuries a lot of his career. I love to see him play. he was almost MVP, right? Or he was in the conversation. But the game is just too fast, I think, and I think they have to figure out how to slow it down, or keep guys healthy. That's my only gripe. Can the good players be available to play in games?
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation because you touched on it before. You talk about watching the league in the 80s and 90s and the physicality inside, the hand checking and all those different things. And that obviously made the game a lot more physical. It was wearing in certain ways on players. But now today, you also acknowledge just the speed of the game, the amount that you have to move off the ball on defense, the effects that has on your body over the course of an 82-game schedule. Me personally, I think the solution would be shortening the schedule, but they're never going to do that, it doesn't seem like, because obviously money talks, and shortening the schedule doesn't seem like something that the owners are open to right now. So we'll see how it progresses, but it definitely is an interesting conversation of, the physicality back then versus kind of the miles that are being put on these guys nowadays, and, comparing and contrasting those two things. But, do you have any favorite players to watch? Obviously, like, there's just so much star power in the league, and there's so many guys that play different styles leading teams now, just, over these past years. Anybody that you've really enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite player to watch in the NBA is Wemby. I love Wemby. I love his energy. I love how he's 7'4" and he barely posts up. I mean, I watched him in the Olympics, and when he lost, it really hurt him. I mean, he really cared about competing and trying to win a gold medal. But man, he is fun to watch. His passing is incredible, and I took my kids to watch him play both times they came to Brooklyn, because I really enjoy watching them play that much. But I mean, yeah, the talent across the league right now, it's in great hands. It's in great hands. And, how about the trade with Luka going to Lakers to play with LeBron? We'll see how that plays out this season and moving forward. But SGA is having an amazing season. I think he's probably the favorite, maybe slightly over the Joker for MVP. But it's fun to watch. I don't really have a favorite player to watch besides Wemby. And I enjoy watching the Cleveland Cavaliers this year reminds me of my Nets teams, where it's like they're doing it collectively and they're getting it done, and they've sustained it, right? Which is what we had to do coming in. No one expected the Cavs to be in this position right now to really say, okay, they have a strong chance of coming out the East and maybe have a chance to win a title this year. So it's fun to watch that team's progression this year with a lot of players that have really bought into the team concept. But SGA is definitely a spectacular scorer. Wow, it's just effortless.
Yeah, it really is. He's unbelievable. I know that you, in the past few years, I think it was a few years back now, you were helping out at Princeton. You were an assistant coach there, right? Mm-hmm. Are there any plans to get back into the coaching sphere anytime soon?
I think so. I think it'll happen eventually. I really enjoy coaching. That was my first time coaching in 2016 and 2018 at Princeton. But yeah, I've always trained NBA players in the off season. I've worked with guys. I enjoy being on the court, sharing what I learned, because this modern game, I understand it. That was kind of how I played back in the mid 90s. I was able to stretch the floor and play off the ball, play with the ball in my hand. So have a lot to share, and can't wait to find that next opportunity that works for me.
All right, Kerry, I think that's all I had. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure that Nets fans are going to be delighted in a season that's been, somewhat downtrodden, to maybe take a look back at some of the good times and hear from a familiar face like yourself. I appreciate it. I hope I get to see you maybe at Barclays Center sometime in the near future. And
I'll be at the Knicks game on the 13th.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So, come down to the media room, or I'll come find you, and we'll chop it up. I'm sure that, a lot of people there will obviously love to see you, but I appreciate you taking the time, man. And maybe we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it, Erik.
That does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. Hope you guys really enjoyed the talk with Kerry. I had a lot of fun. As somebody who's followed the Nets my whole life growing up in New Jersey, it was just awesome to get to talk to him about, what those runs were like and what his career was like, and also, talk to a former NBA player about how some guys are viewing the modern NBA. So that was great. As I said at the top, if you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcasts. Go to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater NBA. Subscribe. Take a second, please. Hit the like button. Comment. Numbers have been down recently with, obviously the Nets season winding down and really expectations and stuff shifting towards the draft coverage. I'm going to have plenty of that soon. But if you can, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of this episode. It really helps. We're approaching the stretch run of the season. We got about 14 games left. The tank race is starting to intensify, and the Nets are kind of in the mix there with the 76ers and the Raptors for those 5, 6, 7 spots. We'll have coverage of all that, Cam Thomas's situation, where the Nets could fall in the draft, what players could look like in free agency, all that and more here on Believe in Nets. Talk to you guys soon.